Hello! In this video, I'm gonna show you how to use the REFramework without the queues from UiPath, using a custom Excel spreadsheet instead, that we from HDB Systems created. Also, I'm going to show the changes that were made in the workflow, mainly on the performer, so that this functionality is possible. The objective of our workflow is very simple. We're gonna grab the values from the initial spreadsheet with these three columns, cash in, honest check, and not honest check, and input them on the UI demo app, doing some validations that will be explained further ahead. The UI demo app is also from UiPath. So let me close this and go to our dispatcher. There it is. So it follows the same template from the previous video, the one about the REFramework for linear processes. So it has only these three states: initialization, process transaction, and end process. Here in the processing, we have these two sub-workflows, read first sheet and write an Excel file. This first one reads the spreadsheet that I showed earlier, and then the second one writes its content on the second spreadsheet, the custom one. It's this one that has these columns. And it's custom because it has a code working on the background, a VBA code. There it is. It will be available on our GitHub, but just to resume, every time a new value is inserted on the caching row, a transaction ID will be automatically created for it. The status will be set to new, the retry is going to be set as 0, and the column time will be filled with the current time of the transaction. And also important, as we know, there are two kinds of exception possible in the REFramework. The business exception, in which the transaction is just set as failed and we move on to the next order. And we have the application exception, in which the transaction will be status will be set to retried, and then we will retry the transaction until the max retry number is reached. So in this code here, the max retries is 3, but we can change this as we please. But, well, it's going to happen. Here's what's going to happen. If a cash-in value, or if a transaction item status is set as failed, and the exception here is set as app, as in application, this status would then change to retried, and a copy of this transaction, like this row, would be inserted on the last row of the spreadsheet, similar to how it happens in the UiPath queue. So for now, that's it for the dispatcher. We can minimize it, and let's go to the performer. Here it is. This is a normal REFramework, so we have these 4 states: initialization, get transaction data, process transaction, and end process. And some changes, as I said, need to be made. The first one and most important is here in the variables. We have to change the type of transaction item to data row, because originally it is a queue item, but as we are not working with a queue anymore, we are working with a row from a data table, we change its type, and we have to do this in all arguments in the workflow. And here in the process transaction, we have a change in the status part. Here in the finally, in this workflow, set transaction status, open workflow. We have the 3 possible outcomes of our transactions: success, business exception, and system exception. In the success, we deleted the part that talked about the status in the queue. As I said, we are not working with the queue anymore, and replace it with an Excel application scope to write in the cell, in the status cell of the spreadsheet, success. So it means the transaction was successful, and we can move on to the next. Here in the business exception, it's similar, and also in the app exception, but here we have 2 write cells. one to inform the status of the transaction as failed, and the other to insert business in the exception column. So in this case, the transaction will not be retried. And the same thing goes for the system exception. The first write cell as failed, and the second that inserts app in the column. In this case, the transaction will be retried. And here in the get transaction data, it's where our data table is being read. Let me just open the workflow. Here it is, the read range. This means that every time the workflow gets to this state, it will read again all the spreadsheet, because as I said, a failed with an app exception transaction will be inserted again on the last row of the spreadsheet. So this means that the spreadsheet is constantly being updated. So we have to read it every time again, so the workflow can work with the updated version of the spreadsheet. Here we filter it. We are getting another data table with the status new and caching, and with a caching value. All right. We sort it here for the time column, so it's assigning. And here this if part just deals with getting the transaction item, which is the data row from the data table. And here we have the write cell that writes in progress in the where it should be new, right? So the new status goes to in progress once that data row, the transaction item, is got to process. So that's it for the get transaction data. And the last part is here in the process transaction, in the process workflow. So here it is. It's very simple. We have the validations that I talked about earlier. The first one checks if the values of the rows, right, cache in, honest check and not honest check, are all numbers, because if you have a letter or something like that in there, it will return to us a business exception. So if it's false, it throws a business exception, as I said. If it's true, we go to another validation that I put here just to add some difficulty to the workflow. That means that the cache in should be always less than 1000. If it is more, it will throw another business exception. If it is false, well, the UI demo actions are performed. Type in 2 and everything. So I guess that's all. I can now run the dispatcher to show you how it's done. Let me minimize this. Go to the dispatcher. Let me just open the correct . Here it is. We are going to get the values from this spreadsheet. I put it right here, and then run the file. We can see the values being inputted with the status new, retry 0, and everything. The transaction ID 1, 2, 3, 4. Let me just wait for it to finish before I show you the time. Okay, it's done. Let me close the dispatcher. Well, the exception column is empty and the time all filled. So I can now run the performer. Perfect. And run. When the UI demo app comes up, I will close it to show the retry system of our spreadsheet. On the item 4. Let's just wait. You can see the in progress. Success. Now on the item 4, we get filed and retried, and its copy is put here on the last row. So just let it run once again. We can see here that this caching is bigger than 1000, so it automatically generates a failed and a business exception. I will show you in just a second. Now the copy is success. Let me just minimize this. So here we got business, app, business, and business, because here we have a letter in the honest check column, and here once again it's bigger than 1000. One thing that I forgot to mention is about the config file here in the performer and also in the dispatcher, but it's kind of the same thing. So I'll just show here in the performer. It's really simple. I put my credentials in the UI demo app. They are stored in my asset in Orchestrator. So I just put them here. And here the path to the custom Excel file which needs to be read. In the case of the dispatcher, this is there too, the Excel file path. And also the path to the first spreadsheet that is read with the values and all. So it can be input in this file here. So that's it for my demonstration. Thank you guys for watching and see you next time.